Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and I'm going to take a little break from my reviews for this video, and I'm going to do another ranking list. This time, this is a worst to best list of all the albums in the discography of the Austin, Texas-based indie rock band known as Spoon. But I'm going to call this a meh to wow list, where meh is meaning the worst album in their discography, and wow is their best album. There's a few bands out there, not very many, but just a few bands that I pretty much know the entire discography of, that I do want to give a meh to wow ranking of. To kick things off, number 9, which is my most meh album by Spoon, is their debut album, Telephono. This is definitely, easily, Spoon's worst album to date. I mean, even though it is their first album, this is a pretty typical one for some people to consider, their weakest album, because Spoon just hadn't really found their own sound or their own aesthetic yet. On this record, they just sound like a kind of bland and tasteless Pixies ripoff without much character to the songwriting or the sound, or even Britt Daniels' vocals didn't really have that much character to them yet. I mean, the album just feels very forgettable. It's fine and acceptable as, like, just an average indie rock album, but compared to much of their following output, this album definitely is a pretty weak link in their discography. And then for number 8, which is my second most meh record in their discography, Transference. This album, I've only heard just a few songs from it, but I've definitely heard enough to sort of give me the feeling of I don't care for this that much. Another record that, while definitely more musically interesting than Telephono, this record does feel really kind of strained, and these songs feel very half-baked and maybe even half-finished, so it's kind of funny. Some of these songs are actually demos that Britt Daniel recorded at home, which I definitely appreciate the band trying to do something a little more raw and scrappy in comparison to Ga 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 Ga, which is like one of their most musically grand and lush records to date. But when it's this kind of lackluster and kind of lacking in guts a little bit, definitely not a very good attempt at it, I would say. Then for my number 7, it's Hot Thoughts, which is Spoon's most recent album, released on St. Patrick's Day of 2017, and a pretty decent record overall. The band definitely does try to sort of expand their sound using more electronics and synthesizers than they've done on past records, using as much little guitar on this album as possible. And sometimes the experiments work, but at other times they're interesting, but their execution kind of fails to fails to impress. And it just feels like the band just kind of indulging and not really pleasing anybody other than themselves. Some of the experiments that I think really work are I love the title track, and other songs like Can I Talk You Into It, Can I Sit Next to You, and Shotgun definitely have some really nice grooves to them. But then you have longer cuts like Pink Up and Us that did sort of try to create something very futuristic, but is it as cool as the idea sounds? Not really. Really. So I have kind of mixed emotions about this record. This record, I definitely would like to see them kind of, if they are going to use this, if they are going to use these kind of sounds in the future, I would love for the execution to just be improved a little bit. And then following that is my number 6 is Gimme Fiction, which I know it's pretty unusual, and I know you're probably thinking, why is Gimme Fiction lower on your list than it is for like some people? Well, it is a really good album. Don't get me wrong. Definitely deserved its critical acclaim, but at times this record, does seem like it gets maybe a little too much praise. I mean, it's a great album, but it's not their best album necessarily. I definitely do love the first half of this record, especially songs like The Two Sides of Monsieur Valentine, The Beast and Dragon Adored, My Mathematical Mind. Definitely features some very refined instrumentation and some great songwriting, and some killer grooves on them too. And then great singles like I Turn My Camera On and Sister Jack are easily two of the catchiest songs of their career. As for the second half, I definitely do really like songs like I Summon You and the weirder and more challenging Wasn't You, but then there are a couple of sort of weaker points on this record that feel just kind of like filler moments just to kind of fill up some gaps in the record. Songs like The Infinite Pet or the closing track, Merchants of Soul. Yeah, they just don't really have as much guts to them, and it just, I kind of feel like the band is just trying to fill in, empty spaces in between the record. It's still definitely a very solid record, and it does see them progressing and sort of refining themselves a little more instrumentally, but I can say it is maybe just a little bit overrated. Now it's time for my top 5, which most of these records I would say are definitely some of the best records of their career. So for my number 5, it's A Series of Sneaks, the band's second album. And first off, this record is the much-needed improvement from their debut. Definitely, yes, is a pretty straightforward indie rock album, but this one just has a lot more guts, a lot more personality, a lot more character. This record did take its time to grow on me, but I definitely, the more I listen to it, the more I just, figure out that, this is very much the building blocks for great records like Girls Can Tell right here. The songwriting is very witty and clever, the hooks are catchy, the songs are short. This album only clocks in at over 33 minutes across 14 songs, but it is it's pretty easy to swallow. Some great rockers on here like June's Foreign Spell, Metal School, The Minor Tough. Some great pop songs on here like Reservations, Car Radio, which literally lasts for only 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Advanced Cassette is a gorgeous little ballad to close the album. I also have to highlight the song Metal Detector. That song is gorgeous too. It definitely does show some similar kind of lo-fi characteristics to like a Guided by Voices record. There's some obvious mistakes that you can pick out of the recording, but that's really part of the magic of this album, is just how this is basically Spoon at some of their most scrappy sort of organic, kind of scrappy and organic to date. And also, Britt Daniels' vocals on this record, I think, finally had some true, oomph to them. Which some of this actually did start a little bit on their Soft Effects EP, which they put out after Telephono. I'm excluding it from the list because it is an EP, but I definitely do recommend that. There's actually some pretty good stuff on there, too. Number 4, They Want My Soul. This is their second most recent record, released in August of 2014, and man, this record kicks ass. It definitely, like, Spoon hadn't really kicked this much ass in their career since 2002's Kill the Moonlight. Like, this record, it definitely is very accessible, yet very, like, raw and kind of jammy at the same time. There are some really great rockers on here, like Rent I Pay, Rainy Taxi, the title track, as well as some solid sort of versatility in style of this record too. You have the song Inside Out, which has this kind of smooth, kind of soulful beat to it, similar to that of like Dr. Dre. Actually. So you hear a little bit of the hip-hop influence coming in. New York Kiss features very cool use of like synthesizers. It's pretty much a sneak peek for the more synth-heavy sound that they would go for on their next album. And then we have Let Me Be Mine, which is this catchy little, marcher that kind of has some aesthetic similar to that of, like, the Beatles. That of the Beatles. It definitely is a record that deserved all of its critical acclaim that it got, because it is easily not only one of the best records they've put out, but it also really does show that the band, still is very consistently capable of putting out some very quality indie rock songs. Now it's time for my number 3, which is the album that very much pushed Spoon to mainstream success, Ga 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 Ga. And there's a good reason why this record is so hailed as one of Spoon's classic records, because it definitely is some of their most sonically ambitious, grand, and lush they've done. I mean, it's probably not the heaviest album they've put out, but it definitely is by far one of the darkest records in their discography, thematically, and definitely musically. It is very grand of a record. Good. Yeah, I had to say it in that accent. And there is definitely. And I love the versatility in this record too. This song, some of my favorite Spoon songs of all time are actually on this record. Songs like "The Ghost of You Lingers," which features this very intense, piano playing, through some very gorgeous and ethereal harmonies from Britt Daniel. I mean, some of the vocals are really beautiful. Others are very intense and eerie. Just absolute gold right there. Right there. Some great poppier songs on here, like You Got Your Cherry Bomb, Don't You Ever, and The Underdog, which is by far Spoon's most played song on the radio, which does make sense because this is actually probably the most commercial recording you will likely hear from this band, and yet still a great song with very witty lyrics and cool horns on there too. Then, of course, it's contrasted with the creepier and stranger My Little Japanese Cigarette Case. I love some of the ballads on here, like Black Like Me, which really does show some maturity and Britt Daniel's songwriting that I really like. And really like the string arrangements on that song. Very gorgeous. Very gorgeous. It definitely is a big milestone of their career. Now it's time for my top 2 Spoon albums of all time, meaning these are their two most wow records, in my opinion. My number 2 is their third album and their debut for Merge Records, Girls Can Tell. This record is most definitely the introduction to what Spoon truly sounds like. I mean, it's definitely, there's definitely still an indie rock band at heart, but here they started getting a little grander, a little more meaningful and introspective and complicated in their songwriting. And definitely developing longer songs too. So this album is a much meatier record than some of the stuff that came before it. It did take a little bit of sort of battling with record labels and thinking about what. It did take a little bit of battling with record labels to really put out this record, but man, it was so worth the wait after a few years. I mean, after being just ridiculously dumped by Elektra, the band definitely had a pretty good run during their time on Merge Records. Songs like Everything Hits at Once, Believing Is Art, Lines in the Suit, and Anything You Want really do show that the band is becoming true masters of melody as well as hook. And there's some really beautiful instrumentation in here. Occasionally they'll slip in a vibraphone, some mellotron flutes, or strings. Some of those elements they incorporate beautifully onto the instrumental track, This Book is a Movie. The kind of sexy riff sidelined by some vibes and kind of eerie strings is really well put together. And now it's time for my number one album of Spoon's discography of all time. This is my most wow album in their discography. And it's their fourth album, Kill the Moonlight. Yeah, Kill the Moonlight is easily one of the best indie albums of 2002, and one of the best indie albums of like the early 2000s. And this is the album that I think really saw this band kind of getting a little attention from some of the masses a little bit, which of course would get into full gear on albums like Gimme Fiction and Ga 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 Ga. And this album is a perfect little like balance between the scrappier feel of their older work and the more polished, lusher sounds that they would use more often on later records. And also, this album has some of the best songwriting of Britt Daniels' career too. The song Small Stakes is a really clever, provocative outlook on taking risks in life that somehow seem pretty normal to a lot of us. Jonathan Fisk, this really cool vignette about a guy who actually used to bully Britt Daniel in school, who eventually later in his life did become a fan of his band. And this song is sort of, telling him politely, hopefully someday I can help you sort of become a better person. Don't Let It Get You Down really does show him. Don't Let It Get You Down is definitely some of the most optimistic I've heard from him, but yet definitely some great storytelling on that track. There are a couple of moments lyrically that I'm not quite as fond of, but overall, this album is just very consistent and well written and very well produced from front to back. This album definitely is an indie rock record, but it does feature some more prominent use of piano and keyboards than heard on a Spoon album before. And they'll occasionally slip in elements like a beatbox loop on Stay Don't Go, or some really cool saxophones on the 1.5 minute You Gotta Feel It You gotta feel it. I did review this album a few years ago, and it's still definitely one of my favorite indie albums of the early 2000s. So it would make total sense that this album would be my number one by them of all time. So that's it for my meh to wow ranking of Spoon's discography. In the comment section, feel free to tell me what your favorite and least favorite albums by them are. I would definitely love to hear what you would have to say. And it kind of makes sense I'm doing a video like this because I'm actually going to see Spoon in concert for the first time. I'm very excited about it. Beck, Spoon, and Sunflower Bean are playing at Merriweather Post Pavilion in Columbia, Maryland in August, and I'm definitely can't wait to see. I've heard they put on a great live show, and I'm very excited to see what they do. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you for episode 231 of Album of the Day.